My name is David Frank. I'm the Dean of the Robert D. Clark Honors College, and I also have the honor of chairing a committee that's called, unfortunately, the Savage Committee on Peace and International Relations. And Charles Savage, who is the person that gave the university the money to create a foundation, worked for the State Department after World War I, and he was a graduate of the University of Oregon, and he desperately wanted the world to seek a way to create peace on earth. And so his vision was that by giving the university a great deal of money in hand, that we would be able to create classes and bring professors to campus and wonderful peacemakers to campus who could then engage our students and our faculty in a conversation about how we might make use of reason rather than violence in solving the problems that divide us. Professor Shaul Cohen this year is overseeing a program, he's done so for 3 years now, that's designed to allow our campus community to better understand the conflict in Northern Ireland that takes place between the Protestants and the Catholics. And rather than bring in the major parliamentarians or the prime ministers, what Professor Cohen has tried to do is to bring the peacemakers to us who are working on the ground, mostly in Londonderry or Derry, Northern Ireland. And so we've had a host of speakers visit us over the last 3 years who have brought to us stories and insights into how peace might be created on the ground between Protestants and Catholics in Northern Ireland. And so Professor Shaul Cohen will introduce our honored guests.
So I want to offer my thanks to Dean Frank and to some others before we begin, certainly to the Savage Endowment, but also to the Department of Geography, to the Clark Honors College, and to the Conflict Resolution Programs, all of whom have combined to make this event possible. And we're very pleased as well to begin easing our way into a new collaboration between the University of Oregon and the Carnegie Council for Ethics in International Relations. 3 of us here at the university, including Dean Frank and myself, will be fellows with the Carnegie Council in the years to come, working to grow and strengthen a network of intellectual communities, but also to make a powerful bridge between students and practitioners around the world so that we can learn together how to harness our energies to try to make a difference in the things that we care about out there beyond the classroom. Tonight's event, as Dean Frank mentioned, is one of a series in which we try to bring the people who are doing the day-by-day work of peacemaking to share their experiences, to share their biographies, to share some of their techniques with us. But also we bring them here in order to celebrate their accomplishments, which largely go unheralded in the world in which they work. Some in Northern Ireland are celebrated as peacemakers. Nobel Prizes have been awarded there. But after the headlines have faded, the communities are left to sort out those agreements which have been forged by diplomats and politicians. And one of the harsh facts of Northern Ireland is that as long as those agreements may have been incoming, they happened in a certain way ahead of the communities that they are supposed to bring towards that peace. And thus the agreements are in place and they're well studied and they're well celebrated. But the people on the ground are still living with some elements of the conflict in the present tense, and certainly living with the legacies of that conflict. And if those people are not tended to carefully and tended to constantly, then those peace agreements will be worth little more than the paper on which they were published and signed. There is a lot of hard work that goes into making the peace. There's a lot of hard work that goes into keeping the peace. And that's why we bring the peacemakers here to campus to teach us, to share with us their experiences, and to be celebrated. When we do this, our primary aim is for them to share their stories with you, and we ask them to convey to you as best they can what it means to be who they are, where they are, and to be involved in the work that they're involved in. And for that reason, they don't engage in a history lesson. I'm going to take just a few minutes to set the context of their work for those of you who may not be particularly familiar with the conflict in Northern Ireland. And I promise that this won't be long. The island itself has for a long time been divided into 32 separate counties. In 1921, the island was partitioned by the British government into 2 separate sections, 26 counties which ultimately would become the Republic of Ireland, and 6 counties which would remain part of the United Kingdom as Northern Ireland. It is the constitutional future of those 6 counties of Northern Ireland that are at the heart of a dispute which takes many forms. It has economic forms, it has political forms, it has religious forms. Ultimately, in many respects, it's about the identity of the people who live there, and do they want to be Irish or do they want to be British? That fundamental cleavage falls in many respects along religious lines, so that the Catholic population in its majority prefers to be part of a united Ireland, and the Protestant population in its majority prefers to be part of the United Kingdom. There are centuries of tension between the communities on the island of Ireland, but in 1968, the tension between the 2 communities escalated into violence which spiraled to unprecedented heights, leading to a civil war commonly known as the Troubles. That part of the story, I think, is fairly well known, as is the part of the story relating to the nominal resolution of that conflict, which took place with the help of the United States and others in 1998 in the historic Good Friday Agreement, which said that the 2 communities would vote and decide sometime in the future about their constitutional alignment. Would they remain a part of the United Kingdom or not? When you look at this map, you get a strong indication that the Good Friday Agreement did not solve all of the problems there between the 2 communities. Where you see a bright orange on this map, you have areas of overwhelmingly Protestant concentration. Where you see the darker greens, those are areas with an overwhelmingly Catholic population. Since the Good Friday Agreement was signed in 1998, the population of Northern Ireland has continued to self-segregate. That agreement did not bring, on a day-to-day basis, Catholics and Protestants together in a shared future. Rather, it outlined for them some of the possibilities for a political arrangement while leaving them divided between the 2 communities on the ground. Northern Ireland is a very segregated community, and we have considerable disagreement between the communities over what they anticipate will be the future of these 6 counties of Northern Ireland. There is pessimism on both sides. There is cynicism on both sides. And there are periods when there is slightly greater convergence in terms of what people expect, and times of greater divergence. The determination of Northern Ireland's constitutional future is still ahead of us. But a lot of work needs to be done just to maintain cordial relations as best one can up until that point, and optimally to develop better relations between the communities so that when it comes time to decide, and there is a winning community and a losing community in Northern Ireland, and not all of us would like that framing of things, but many people of there will see it that way, so that the losing side and the winning side can move forward together to the best degree possible, whether it's a Northern Ireland as part of the United Kingdom, a Northern Ireland that's united with the Republic of Ireland, or some alternative which leaves these 6 counties in a blended or independent status. All of that is the work of political parties, of diplomats, of elected leaders. On a day-to-day basis, those people are really quite removed from the communities that they represent and serve. Today we're going to be hearing from Nigel Gardner and Anna Murray, who live the daily life of trying to keep this piece together and make it work. Just 2 quick things before I let them tell you their stories. And they're about getting them here. None of this would have happened without the help of Madeline Bailey, who's a student here at the University of Oregon. So I want to express my appreciation to Madeline for her hard work. And the other set of appreciations goes to the American consulate in Belfast, which succumbed to the fury and might of Anna Murray, who worked very hard to secure a visa for Nigel. Today is Tuesday. We learned that Nigel would get his visa last Wednesday. He flew on Saturday. And the invitation to Nigel actually didn't come much before that. So I'm very grateful to Nigel for being willing to drop everything. And there's an election coming up in Northern Ireland, and Nigel's presence there is strongly desired, but here he is with us, so we're very lucky in that regard. Thanks to Nigel, thanks to Nigel's party, thanks to Anna, thanks to the consulate, and on short notice, thanks to you for joining us this evening. Our format will be 20 minutes roughly of Nigel to share some of his story with you, and then 20 minutes from Anna to tell you about her life in Northern Ireland. Then Nigel will have a few more minutes to embellish, and Anna will have the same, and then we will open it up to your questions. And before we're done, I'm sure that we will have learned a lot, but also felt a lot in relation to how their lives have been carried out. In keeping with the spirit of the Carnegie Council, Nigel and Anna come to us as representatives of living the ethical life. They don't stay home. They come out, they get into the trouble, they try to make things better, and that makes them very valuable and cherished guests for us. Please welcome Nigel Gardner.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Firstly, I would like to thank Dean Frank and Professor Cohen for the kind remarks. Special word of thanks also goes to Madeline, who ensured that I actually got here. Sean has touched on quite a lot of Northern Ireland. He gave an excellent overview. So basically, I'm going to now talk my role in the conflict in Northern Ireland. So basically, born and raised in Londonderry. And Londonderry is a city of many names. From the Protestant community, we refer to the city as Londonderry, or the Maiden City. From the Catholic community, they call it Derry. Therein lies potential for conflict. At the start of the conflict in 1968, the civil rights campaign for equal housing, one man, one vote, one man, one job. That was the start of conflict in Northern Ireland. Conflict escalated in 1969, and on the 14th of August 1969, the British Army arrived on the streets. Sectarian violence was escalating right across, to the extent the potential was there for civil war. I didn't have really much of an input to the early start of the conflict. In 1970, because what was the police force of Northern Ireland at the time, the Royal Ulster Constabulary, was so undermanned with a staff of 5,000 police officers to patrol all of Northern Ireland. 8,000 soldiers were deployed in 1969 to Northern Ireland. 1st of April 1970, the formation of the new part-time militia to help the army and the police was formed, the Ulster Defence Regiment. And I looked at it and I thought, yeah, I could buy into that. Or the other alternative was I get involved in a paramilitary organisation. So I took a democratic road to look for peace and a better option for the communities in Northern Ireland. And that's where my journey began. 1971, 72 and 73 were probably the worst years for sectarian violence in Northern Ireland. Okay. Can you hear me? Yeah? Higher. Blame Shoal. What about that? Is that good? Yeah. 1971, 72, 73 were the worst years for sectarian violence in Northern Ireland. An estimated 775 people lost their lives just because you're either a Catholic or a Protestant and you happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. You were just lifted from the street and taken away and shot and your body dumped. 1974, we had the Ulster Workers' Council strike, where Northern Ireland was virtually brought to a standstill. No petrol, no food, everything was rationed. We had no-go areas where you weren't allowed in to this particular area because you were a Catholic, and vice versa, you weren't allowed into this particular area because you were a Protestant. Bear in mind, in 1972, we had Operation Motorman right across Northern Ireland, where Catholic areas were no-go areas to the police and to the army. And it created all sorts of problems. So the army decided the time policy must change. So they looked at operational procedures. I take it that's not working, no? They looked at operational procedures, and the terrorist threat had actually increased, and it affected me on 1977, my first encounter with terrorism, where I was going to my work, and because I set a pattern, I become an easy target, and 2 shots were fired at my car. Thankfully, I was able to avert the danger and drive out of it, but took up a defensive position and waited to engage the terrorist. Didn't happen. During the time, 1976, a very close friend of mine was picked up on his way to go out and do his shopping. And he was picked up by 2 armed men. It was a Tuesday evening, St. David's Day, and he was found on Saturday morning, 3 miles from where I live at a border crossing. Because he decided to wear a uniform to serve his country, the IRA didn't want him doing that, so they tortured him, they mutilated him. The gory details: cut his penis off, put it in his mouth, wrapped his mouth with barbed wire, wrapped his hands with barbed wire, took an acetylene burner to him, and eventually shot him 7 times. That was frightening for me, frightening for my family, frightening for my colleagues. My option was, I was angry, I wanted vengeance, I wanted revenge, I wanted to go out and shoot people. And I thought, yeah, I could quite easily do that. Leave the regiment and join a paramilitary organisation. You know, it makes me one of them. I didn't want to be one of them. So I spoke to my minister, sought his advice, told me to carry on, do the good work, do the Lord's work. I said, well, that's fine. But the situation was getting worse on a weekly basis. 1978, more sectarian killings. Police arrived at my door. I was to be shot from unknown location within a 48-hour period. Information had come through Special Branch, Police Intelligence, and I was asked to leave my house. And I thought, why? If I leave my house, who wins? Terrorist? Of course. And I decided I would stay put. But I warned the police, you know, if somebody comes to my house, be prepared because I will shoot them. I will have no hesitation. So I was taken to Ballykelly, military barracks, and my weapon that I carried was taken from me, and I was given a stronger caliber weapon, 9mm weapon, and I was taken back home. And morning, noon, and night, I lived like that, carrying a gun. But the terrorists had also perfected the undercarriage booby trap bomb. Mercury tilt switch. If you didn't check your car, As soon as you drove down a little incline, a car blew up, and you with it. 9 out of 10 times, you would have not have survived. Been horribly just torn apart. Just a torso, that's all would have been left of you. So to avoid that, I made sure I checked my car, because the terrorist would have been watching if I had been checking my car. So I become a hard target to the terrorist. What was his other alternative? The secondary attack, the shoot. So the only way the terrorist could have got me was either leaving my home to go to my work, or leaving my work to go to my home. And I adopted the terrorist tactic. Think how the terrorist operates. How would you operate? So I played the terrorist at his own game. So instead of starting work at 8 o'clock in the morning, and I only worked 3 miles away, I would have left the house at 7 o'clock and travelled 25 miles to my work, so the terrorists wouldn't get me. And I would have left working maybe 9, 10 o'clock at night, and would have done the same, took a different journey, maybe travelled 15, 30 miles home. But survival was the name of the game. I still had the problems, still being threatened, but I was adamant that I was going to do my utmost to help secure peace in Northern Ireland. 1980, 81, 82, turbulent time in Northern Ireland's history, the hunger strike. 13 people sacrificed their lives for a false promise that they'd be guaranteed a united Ireland. Never materialised. 13 people died, starved themselves to death. But 800 more people died in the streets of Northern Ireland. In the Republic of Ireland, the south of Ireland, England, Belgium, Germany. What for? Because they haven't achieved anything. All they had achieved was heartache. Give heartache and heartbreak to other families. 1985, my patrol, we were going along an urban area, and just a massive explosion took my patrol. My vehicle was heard 22 metres away. We all got out. We were badly cut up, but none of us were killed. That was a blessing. And it gave me the added impetus to fight and challenge these people and take them on. And I had no compulsion. If I had met them, confronted them, I would have shot them. I make no apologies for that. They were creating anarchy, civil strife right throughout Northern Ireland, the south of Ireland, mainland Britain. They had to be stopped. The only way to stop them was violence with violence, playing with their own game. And this is where intelligence comes in. Overt and covert operations, deep undercover operations. I was part of that in the urban areas, lying for 5-6 days at a time, 24 hours a day, dug in, no food. You were given a little tablet to take to stop you from getting hungry, stop you from going to the toilet. It's just the way the army worked. But you were there for a purpose, to gather intelligence and report that intelligence to thwart any other planned terrorist attacks. It worked. Then we had the emergence of the Protestant paramilitary groups, who were, by and large, pretty active, but weren't as active as the IRA groupings. But the Protestant paramilitaries looked at strategy. How can we kill these people? Instead of killing them one at a time, they started to kill 4 and 5 at a time. Loughlin Island, which is in Armagh, the Grey Steel shooting, the trick-or-treat in 1994, 9 Catholics were killed. Belfast, the bookie shop, 5 Catholics were killed, 2 were members of the IRA. And that was a catalyst to get people talking behind the scenes. So all of a sudden, IRA terrorists, Protestant terrorists were talking. They established a small but a vital network. How can we deal with this? The talking went on. 1985, we had the signing of the Anglo-Irish Agreement by then Prime Minister Mrs. Thatcher. It incensed the fury and the wrath and the anger of the Protestant community across Northern Ireland. 250,000 people converged on the streets of Belfast to voice their anger. That night, 9 people were murdered in various areas across Northern Ireland. Anglo-Irish Agreement was a way of pushing the Protestant people into the south of Ireland, into a united Ireland, and that's not what they wanted. Paramilitaries within the Protestant community didn't want that, so they decided we will up the campaign and become pretty professional in manufacturing the bomb. 2 of their colleagues blew themselves up. I don't have any sympathy for them. They were creating major problems for the security forces, as well as creating fear into the nationalist community. So for almost 22 years, I lived with the threat of death 24/7 from a terrorist. I lived with a gun, I slept with a gun, but it's made me who I am today. So when I resigned from the regiment after that long time, I decided enough was enough. I had no social life, didn't go out anywhere, couldn't go out anywhere because the terrorists always had their spotters in any pub or club that you lived or and visited. So socializing was out the window for me. So after I came out, I decided, what can I do to help my community? Rebuild, re-image, regenerate the areas. A few of us got together. We got a small building. We renovated it into a makeshift community hall. And we embarked on a process of engaging with the other, what's commonly referred your counterpart in the opposite religious divide. It had its ups and downs, created major problems. And again, the threats were directed at me. What are you doing here? We don't need you here. You're nothing but a British soldier. I'm trying to make a difference. What are you trying to do? That night, I went to bed early. I was so exhausted. And broken glass woke me. Petrol bomb was through my window. My car was burnt to the ground. There was 2 petrol bombs. Again, I was still a victim of the violence. Nobody was prepared to let bygones be bygones. I was still a target. So in 1997, I joined a political party, the Progressive Unionist Party. This particular party offers political analysis to a terrorist group in Northern Ireland, which is the Ulster Volunteer Force. And there are other colleagues from the Protestant paramilitary group, the Red Hand Defender. And because I took a chance to go and join a political party of my own choosing, as it was my democratic right, again I come under the threat from terrorists. It didn't deter me. I have a job to do. So my job was coming from a peacekeeping role to a peacemaking role. I embarked on a series of meetings. I challenged people, challenged their perceptions. What can they offer? How can they work with me? How can we have a joined-up approach? How can we secure peace in Northern Ireland? We held clandestine meetings, not in a hotel, in a park, 4 o'clock in the morning, so you weren't compromised. Nobody knew these meetings were going on. It was part of a building of confidence, building of trust. Things started to move along very, very well. We then had what we call interface violence, sectarian violence, Catholic and Protestants fighting at each other's basically doorstep, because when you look at the demographics, geographics of Northern Ireland, people lived basically side by side. Shaw touched on the aspect of politicians. Politicians weren't there. Myself, Anna, and our colleagues, we were at the coalface of sectarian violence till 4, 5, 6 o'clock in the morning. Once you got everybody away, area calmed down, liaised with the police. You went home, had a quick wash, straight to do a day's work. That's when I become involved in full-time community work with EPIC, Ex-Prisoners Interpretive Centre. I'm involved in a program with people who would have tried to kill me years ago. And it's ironic. There are 6 constituent groups involved in the Prison to Peace project, for which I'm the project coordinator. I don't work just in Londonderry, I work across all of Northern Ireland, right, on the island of Ireland. The groups are from the IRA, from the Protestant paramilitaries. But you know what their aim is? To sustain and maintain the peace in Northern Ireland. They're delivering the peace in Northern Ireland. They must be recognised for the peace in Northern Ireland and for the work that they do. And as a former combatant who would have been an arch enemy to these people, they respect the work that I'm trying to do, and I respect the work that they're now doing. So my work today is in community relations. It's about bringing our divided communities together, because the war in Northern Ireland is over. Sadly, the conflict in Northern Ireland is not over. We have at the present time in Northern Ireland a very serious situation. The threat from dissident members of the IRA. It has the potential to destabilise the peace process. Our project From Prison to Peace are not prepared to let these people take Northern Ireland back to the dark old days and have another 38 years of violence. We will plough on, we will deliver, we will be successful. But while the threat is there, it undermines everything that we're trying to do. And it's back to what I was doing before. I'm now finding myself doing today, checking my car for a bomb. I thought them days were far behind me, but obviously they're not. So I can't perceive myself to be a hard target any longer. I've got to take cautions. Survival is the name of the game. So the normalisation of conflict, it's a very interesting aspect, the normalisation. I thought when the peace process was signed, the army were withdrawn from the streets, taken into barracks, and in a 3-month period, all the watchtowers right across Northern Ireland were taken down. And I'm going to finish there. Shaw has given me a signal. And I'll come back and sum up the last 5 minutes, because there's a few things that I think you need to be told, notable events in Northern Ireland's turbulent history and the current concerns that we have and our future. So for the time being, thank you.
How's that? Can everybody hear me? No? I'll just talk loud. Is that okay? Can everybody hear me now? Okay. Good evening, everybody. thank you so much, not just for your warm welcome and hospitality which we've received since we arrived here, but for the interest that you all show in the work which we do and where we live. So my story is different to Nigel's in a lot of ways. I am from what is described as the Catholic, Nationalist, Republican community. These are all three different things which sometimes can overlap and sometimes don't. But for ease of reference this evening, I will just refer to the Catholic community. So, I live and work in a city called Derry, which is the second largest city in Northern Ireland. As Nigel mentioned earlier, it's also known as Londonderry, Derry, the Maiden City, the Walled City, Foyle, Derry stroke Londonderry, or for short, Stroke City, or there must be other names, but I've probably forgot them. We use alternative names to Derry and Londonderry to avoid giving information about ourselves, because one or the other name will identify you as being from one or the other community. This evening, for ease of reference, once again, I will refer to Derry because that is what we would have always said when I was growing up. So most talks and books and information on Northern Ireland and Nigel's presentation this evening normally begin with the civil rights movement, the descent into violence, the emergence of paramilitaries, the late 60s, the early 1970s. I wasn't born until 1977, so it's difficult for me to talk about that, the first time Nigel experienced sectarianism, actually. When I was born, about 2,500 people had already been killed in Northern Ireland. Thousands more had been injured. The army were well established on the streets in Northern Ireland, and we heard about bombs and shootings and ambushes and things like that on a daily basis. So for the first 20 years of my life, the physical environment around me would have been very dominated by all the paraphernalia of conflict. We had watchtowers, checkpoints, sandbags, roadblocks. You would have been searched in the street. Some roadblocks would have been set up randomly. Some roadblocks were permanent. In larger cities, there were permanent roadblocks in and around courthouses, shopping areas. A lot of shops had private security guards on their doors to search your bags when you went in to make sure you weren't carrying a bomb. We would have been used to seeing the army patrols on the streets, moving up and down. Is this a hard formation? Is that what it's called? Pardon? Is that a hard formation? Is that when the army moves up and down the streets? Two of them crouch in a driveway or behind a car, and then two of them move forward whilst they give cover. And this is in and around walking to school or doing your shopping or whatever, with these heavily armed soldiers in and around you, crouching and providing cover to one another. But we didn't really, it was always there. It was always there. We didn't really question it that much. Bomb scares, real bombs, sometimes hoax bombs, caused disruption to services, to schools, life in general, traffic jams, traffic queues. I have a really clear, not even that many years ago, of being in a supermarket and there was a bomb scare and we were told to leave, and I begged the girl, please ring my groceries through, please, come on, please just ring them through. And I think there might have actually been a bomb that day, I'm not sure. But it became such a normal thing that I don't think a lot of people just wanted to consider the depth of it. I don't think a lot of people wanted to give any thought to how serious it actually could have been, because that was a coping mechanism. I think also because the conflict in Northern Ireland never descended into all-out war, such as former Yugoslavia, it makes a lot of people reluctant to address what has happened. Daily life continued in and around the conflict. People worked, people socialized. It might have been curtailed, but it certainly didn't stop. Family life continued in and around the conflict. My parents would certainly have tried to shield us from the worst of incidents, but when we stayed with my grandmother, she put a mattress up against the window to stop stray bullets. We didn't think about this. We didn't pay any attention to it. It was just when you stayed at Granny's house, there was a mattress up against the window, and when you stayed in your other Granny's house, there wasn't, because she lived in the country and there was less chance of stray bullets there. So we didn't talk about these things. My family weren't sectarian. My family are mixed. I was lucky in the sense that my mum went to university and my dad was interested in sports, motorcycling, which is a fairly mixed sport. So we didn't discuss the conflict other than maybe in abstract terms or in terms of current events. Don't take that road, because the army are stopping up there and you'll be delayed. But I was always very conscious growing up of there being resentment. When you were stopped at a roadblock, you were resentful. When you were searched in the street, there was resentment. There was always a sense of them and us. Whether perceived or real, the sense of them and us was very, very real, and the sense that this was being done to you because of who you were, because of where you were from. Some people in Northern Ireland say you can tell who's Protestant to look at them, but I don't know if that's true or not. But you can certainly gauge who is a Protestant based on their surnames, their first names. You can, if you ask them where they went to school, where they're from, you can make a pretty good guess. So most people I know from the Catholic community would have been fairly sure that when they were stopped and searched and when they were pulled aside for further questioning and further searches after giving their names, that it was because of their religion or because of the answers that they gave. I'm older now. I've lived away from Northern Ireland. I can see things differently. I'm still pretty sure that some of those people who searched me when I was a child did so at best because they were overzealous in their work. But at worst, I think some of them probably acted out of sectarianism, or to use a Northern Irish expression, badness. I think in the Catholic community there was also an acceptance of the actions of the IRA from a lot of people because they didn't necessarily feel that the police represented them. They didn't, the civil rights movement and things like that. When I was growing up, there was a sense that there wasn't the same resentment towards terrorists as there was towards the police and the security forces. Again, it's a them and us feeling. When I got older, we moved to Denmark, and I was able to look at things from a completely different point of view. I was really surprised when people in Denmark asked me if it was a holy war, because I wasn't aware of that. And I don't think anybody else in Northern Ireland would consider themselves involved in a holy war, but it's useful to look at things from the outside. So that helped me change my mind on some things. It helped me become aware of how not normal the situation in Northern Ireland was. How very, very, very not normal the situation was. And then the ceasefires took place, and then the Good Friday Agreement was signed, and very quickly after the agreement was signed, all this paraphernalia of conflict disappeared. So the watchtowers came down. The army, as Nigel mentioned, the army quickly was pulled off the streets. The physical surroundings of the conflict just disappeared. And today I think a lot of people still don't really want to talk about what we came through. I had dinner with my parents recently, and I have to stress this, my parents have never had any involvement in any paramilitary organizations, or, I mean, they're open-minded people, but we were eating dinner one evening when I asked my mum, was that person not at your wedding? And my mum said, no, he wasn't at our wedding, he was in prison at the time. And my dad said, no, he wasn't, he was on the run. He was on the run, and that's why he missed the wedding. And he missed Anna's christening because he was in prison. Oh, that's right, I got it. So, and this was in a completely normal context, and that's when I thought, goodness, that's unusual. But these are normal conversations that people have up and down the country, and don't think they're not normal. Today in Northern Ireland, I think we are in a very strange situation. We are in a period of transformation, obviously. My generation are sort of the generation that are caught in the middle, because we weren't old enough to have an active role in the conflict. We weren't old enough to join paramilitaries and be trained to do things, or to join the security forces like Nigel did. And we're too young to not know what it was like either. So now I find myself in a role where I coordinate a wide range of projects which are geared at working towards community relations, and I work with young people who don't really know what the conflict was like, and they have no memory really of the army, they've no memory of terror, they've no memory of bombs, they've no memory of people being killed, and they're young, so they don't really understand what it means either. We don't talk about it a lot. We don't talk about it in our communities because it's unpleasant and there's not a really huge will to talk about things that are difficult. It's not discussed in schools on an emotional level. In schools, we talk about this happened, then these politicians got together and they signed an agreement and it was all over. But we don't talk about the impact that it had on our communities or on people. So young people have big gaps in their knowledge. They've big massive gaps in their understanding of the conflict, and they fill these gaps in their knowledge with imagination of a more romantic and more exciting time. And then there's my generation, people who are coming into roles of leadership. My friend is currently the mayor of Derry, the youngest mayor ever, but he is the mayor of Derry. I have another friend who was the mayor of a village up the road, Buncrana. Guy who was a couple of years ahead of me at university is the director of the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission. So my generation are moving into positions of influence in our community, and we have a peace agreement that we had no part in brokering. We have inherited a peace that we had no part in brokering. We've inherited a conflict that we had no part in acting out, and we are tasked with moving this forward. So that should be interesting. I hope we figure it out. The generation that are coming right behind us are keen for a bit of excitement. They have romantic ideas of what it used to be like, and with no basis in reality, but when did that ever stop anyone? So that is the context that I find myself working in today. Sort of stuck in the middle, and that is the challenges that we face. I'll finish with just briefly mentioning that we still have paramilitary groups in Northern Ireland today who have broken away from the mainstream paramilitary groups who are under ceasefire. So they're known as dissidents, and they are not under ceasefire, and they are still very active in Northern Ireland, and they're recruiting. The dissident groups are all aged about 40 plus, and the people they recruit are about 15. Nobody recruits us because we remember what it was like, so I'm not going to buy into that, and most of my generation aren't going to buy into that, which is a good thing. But the 15-year-olds are really enamored with the stories that they're told, and it's more exciting to go and riot and throw stones at the police than it is to sit down and have difficult conversations about why this happened and how it affected us and how we can move forward. But nevertheless, I work for an organisation which tries to promote this alternative, and we have been successful so far. We've had great successes, so I don't want to leave you with a really negative image of Northern Ireland. For as much bad things go on in our country at the moment, there is as much positive work as well. So I'd like to leave you on that note, and thank you for your time.
Just a quick summing up on the work that I actually do in the Prison to Peace project. There are 3 themes attached to it: conflict transformation, citizenship, that involves working with the youth, and social change, sustainability within our communities. Conflict transformation is getting all the former combatants together to deliver and ensure the peace process will remain intact and they don't go back to conflict. Every school throughout the island of Ireland has now bought into the Prison to Peace project through the citizenship books that we have now launched, and it's to educate our youth so they can learn from the mistakes that their peers committed in the past. The social change, looking at regeneration, re-imaging of areas, sustainability, small businesses, and plough back into the economy within their local areas. So looking at the future, where are we today? Two notable events that have come out in the last year: the Savile inquiry into the Bloody Sunday murder in 1972. The people have been vindicated. Still people not happy at the cost of the inquiry. However, the people have been vindicated. Another positive aspect, Londonderry were successful in becoming the UK City of Culture for 2013. And that's going to do a lot, not just for Londonderry, but for Northern Ireland. It's going to create employment, it's going to give a strong infrastructure, and it's going to foster good cross-community relationships. However, we still have a problem today. Anna touched on it earlier. The threat from dissident paramilitary organisations, not just from the nationalist community, but also from the Protestant community. It is so serious. It has the potential to embroil Northern Ireland back into conflict. And this is what the dissidents are trying to do. With hoax bombs, genuine bombs right across Northern Ireland, they stretch a police force who cannot control. It will give the dissidents, be under no illusion, the dissidents are planning a major spectacular to take out as many people as humanly possible. They don't care who they are, Catholic or Protestant. That then will embroil the Protestant paramilitaries back into conflict, and it will take us right back. I had a meeting with the senior police officer 2 weeks ago, the Chief Constable, Mr. Baggett, and I voiced my concerns pertaining to the dissident threat. He informed me he has adequate police resources. I informed him from the Loyalist paramilitary group, the Ulster Volunteer Force and Red Hand Commando Group, ex-prisoner groups who I work with. I also informed him that there would be no knee-jerk responsibility or reaction coming from these groups. They will not retaliate against a terrorist threat. But how long can you keep a dog on a leash before you let it off? Within Protestant communities at the present time, they're now asking, when can we take the gloves off and take these people on? There's an organisation called the Combined Loyalist Military Command, which oversees loyalist activity in Northern Ireland. And in 1994, it offered, and I'll quote, its abject remorse for the hurt they caused upon the nationalist community. It was then deactivated. A month ago, it's been reactivated to monitor the dissident threat in Northern Ireland. We're looking at dangerous, dangerous men within Protestant paramilitary organisations who will not just take a fight onto the streets of Northern Ireland, but into the island of Ireland. And that has major potential for civil war. It's a very doom and gloom scenario. But we have the future ahead, City of Culture. Our peace work is on, and that's what I'm building my future on. And hopefully the dissidents will not carry out what they're intending to do. So please feel free to ask any questions. And again, thank you very much.
Okay, can you hear me? Great. Yes, I have to agree with Nigel. It has been a year of great highs and great lows. The The city that we live in is going to be the UK City of Culture in 2013, which should be great. The Savile Inquiry, which is an inquiry families have been campaigning for 38 years, was finally published 10 years after it started. But in the last 2 days in Northern Ireland, there have been 2 bomb scares. One real bomb, one hoax bomb. Both brought the cities of Newry and Belfast to a standstill. Last month, my office was evacuated twice because we have the misfortune of being in close proximity to the courthouse. And bomb scares never seem to happen when you have nothing to do or when you're tired and couldn't be bothered to be at work. They always happen at a really bad time. So there are great challenges for us. But I will finish with with just giving you a brief overview of what it is I do every day. I work for an organisation which is called Peace and Reconciliation Group. The organisation has 3 main strands. We provide training in conflict resolution, we have a mediation service, and we have a project branch, which is the work that I coordinate. Very broadly speaking, I have 4 main areas that my projects are targeted at. I have a project targeted at very young children, which looks at culture, identity, symbols. I have some research which shows children can identify can have sectarian thoughts as young as 4 or 5 years old, so we try and get them early. I have a project which runs annually, which wouldn't have happened this year without Madeleine Bailey, which is it's a project which addresses politics and democracy with young people. We have a series of events finishing in a large public debate event. And then we have a family program which runs annually, which provides respite to families who live in areas where there are flashpoints, heightened tensions, families who may need respite because other family members are in prison or who have suffered as a result of the Troubles. And finally, I have a project which involves ex-prisoners. And we work with Republican ex-prisoners and Loyalist ex-prisoners. And it's a lot more nuanced than this, but very broadly speaking, we work with the ex-prisoner groups separately for as long as it takes until we can bring them to a point where they can work together and engage in what we call cross-community work. But getting those groups to that point is not often easy, and a bit of carrot, bit of stick, and a bit of luck, and hopefully we'll get there. We are funded by there's an organisation in Northern Ireland called the Community Relations Council. They, in turn, are funded directly by Westminster in London. The Community Relations Council are completely autonomous from any other political institution in Northern Ireland, apparently. And they fund us for 3 years at a time, about 85% of our costs. Anything else we beg, steal, borrow. I'll send a hat round in a minute you can throw some coins into if you want to. All our projects are funded separately. I write lots of funding applications. Some projects have 3 or 4 different funders. Each funder has different restrictions, requirements. You can't work with anybody under 16. You can't work with anybody from the other side of the border. You can't spend any money on refreshments. We will only allow you to use 10% of your budget on room hire, completely random things. If the dog barks twice, you can't spend any money that week. It's a constant juggle to keep things going, and I would love a magic wand and have money to do a 10-year program and just roll it all out, but I don't, and probably never will have. But that keeps things interesting, certainly. It also means I get to tailor programs and adjust programs and go, okay, we're going to do an adult element of this program now because we're not allowed to spend money on children anymore, so to keep things rolling. But it's certainly always interesting, it's always challenging, and I can't imagine ever doing anything else. So I welcome your questions.
So I don't think I'm speaking out of school if I say that Northern Ireland is not known for its brevity of speech. But hopefully we'll have the opportunity to ask a number of questions that you'll be able to pose to both Nigel and Anna. And we'll be at that for a little while, but they'll also be around afterwards if you don't have the chance to ask your question while we're in this constellation. Perhaps you'll be able to approach them afterwards. And I'll also put up contact information for them and for their organizations in case you want to be in touch with them, ask them queries, send them suggestions or money. They won't be opposed. It's the Oregon way. And we'll be able to have questions and answers for a good 30 minutes. So please, Anna and Nigel, come on up. And we'll have your questions not through the microphone, but please do speak loudly and clearly. And who would like to begin? Peggy.
My experience when visiting the Republic of Ireland was there was no segregation. It didn't matter what your religion was. It was a very friendly environment. So I'm wondering if the UK at some point got to the point where they gave Northern Ireland back to the Republic of Ireland, could you see that happening in Northern Ireland?
No.
No?
As it stands now, when you look at the Good Friday Agreement, Dublin's claim to Northern Ireland was removed, with the Articles 2 and 3 removed from the Irish Constitution. That's first and foremost. So therefore the Union is safe with Britain, and that's what the Protestant community are looking for. They've now been guaranteed that. However, probably not in my lifetime, Ireland will be united, but not at present. Even with the economy.
Is the Republic of Ireland not interested in having Northern Ireland?
They are, but they can't afford it at the present time because of the economy.
Sorry, could I just very quickly add a comment to that? I don't think the Republic of Ireland are particularly interested in having us. That's my general impression. I have, one of my projects involves the Protestant community in County Donegal. I've also worked with people, members of the Protestant community in County Sligo, which is further towards the south. And both of those communities would say, yes, there was no trouble. No, we were not persecuted. We were allowed to practice our religion, but we kept our heads down, our mouths shut, and we got on with it, and we knew better than to open our mouths. So I don't believe that the Republic of Ireland is inclusive, and I think there are many issues in the Republic of Ireland which have not yet been addressed, and I see moves being made to address this, but so I'd just like to point that out.
In Dublin, they've had a Jewish, mayor, and my, understanding.
Yeah, but he's not Irish. The Jewish community are not part of the conflict.
No, that's true. But it makes it so it is. They're not discriminating against religion. It seems. Maybe in the urban areas they're not, but in the rural areas they are. I don't know.
I think it still exists in the rural areas in the Republic of Ireland, certainly. That would be my... In and around Dublin, there is a tendency for the Protestant community to have quite a lot of money, which has maybe insulated them a little bit. But once you get out into the rural areas, I think the perception is amongst the Protestants that I have spoken to that they did not feel that they were able to be outspoken about certain things.
Do you think that Gerry Adams' recent election to the Dáil and the increase in Sinn Féin's representation in the Dáil will have any effect on a united Ireland?
Republican strategy in Northern Ireland throughout the conflict paid off. Gerry Adams has done his work in Northern Ireland. That is the reality. He's now moved to incorporate what he'd done in Northern Ireland into the south of Ireland. He had a massive landslide with the 12 candidates, but I think that's as far as he's going. He can still push. They still aspire to united Ireland, but at the present time it's unachievable.
I have heard it said in America that President Obama's election was a knee-jerk reaction to George Bush. And I think Sinn Féin's recent electoral success is a knee-jerk reaction to the abysmal failure of the Fianna Fáil party. I have to agree with Nigel. I don't see them going any further. I think if they are going to move any further, they're going to have to broaden their election strategies and do something about economic regeneration, do something about the education system. If they're capable of delivering on those areas, then who knows? But at the moment, Dublin and Monaghan, both towns in the Republic of Ireland, well, Dublin obviously, Monaghan, another town in the Republic, were bombed badly in the 1970s. My parents lived in just outside Dublin in the 1970s and were told, please go home, bring your troubles back up north with you. We really don't want you here. And I think there's still that lingering perception. I also think maybe there's a bit of guilt in the Republic of Ireland at the fact that they left people to burn, for want of a better expression. So it's a lot more nuanced than that. The reunification of Ireland isn't just black or white. And Nigel does think there may be a reunification of Ireland. I struggle to see it. So.
Nigel, you're working in some kind of restorative, transformational process, reconciliation among former combatants. Can you talk a little bit about, is there outreach from that process to the larger community? And the question for Anna, would you talk a little bit about the types of mediations that your organization is doing?
Tim, thank you. Answer to your question. Within the Northern Ireland context, community restorative justice is very much alive. Unfortunately, that particular project works solely within the Roman Catholic community. However, within the Protestant community, an organisation has been formed 9 years past called Alternatives. It's based on a similar related model to community restorative justice. The difference is because the organisation depends on referrals from paramilitary groups. These are young people who have been involved in antisocial behaviour, who will not make any restitution, who will not abide by the law. So they come to the attention of the loyalist paramilitary groups, who in turn put them under either a death sentence or give them 24 hours to leave the country. So they're starting now to embark on that particular programme, working with the Juvenile Services, the Probation Board of Northern Ireland, and the Youth Intervention Services, along with the ex-prisoner groups from within the Protestant community. It's a long battle, but slowly but surely we're actually getting there. Does that answer your question, Tim?
Yeah. I'm just interested in the kind of the ripple effect from the work you're doing out into the community that is leveraged by the connections you're making across the divisions between former combatants.
I have the ripple effect every day in my life, trying to get through to these people. I just cannot walk in to a nationalist area and look at their particular programme on community restorative justice, because I don't come from that community. But I can go into the Shankill Road in Belfast, or go into North Belfast. Yeah, I represent the former combatants from within the Ulster Volunteer Force Red Hand Commander Group. Members of their family, and that's normally what happens, have come to attention. They're under a serious threat. I've got to engage with that group of children or young adults to implore upon them the alternative. If you don't engage on the training programme with the Probation Board, Youth Justice Services, etc., the alternative is you're expelled from Northern Ireland. That's terrible. You know, for a 16, 17-year-old to be told he's getting out of the country of his birth and he's not allowed back in for 2 or 3 years, or the alternative is he's taken away up an alleyway. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is reality. It's not a myth. They're taking up a laneway, paramilitary punishment, beaten, shot in the legs, or at the worst, a hood put over their head, and they're shot dead. So the ripple effect is there, and it's not there. I'm in a situation because of the closeness that I would have with the paramilitary groupings. I can have that one-to-one with them. But if the paramilitaries don't want to talk to me, there's not a lot I can do about it, because they will go ahead and mete out their type of justice anyway, be it on a restorative justice program or be it from a violent context.
I might just add to what Nigel said, because my office also deals with intimidation cases, although not in as hands-on a role as Nigel's. The role that we would be able to do, the service that we can provide, is that we can verify whether or not an intimidation case or a death threat is valid. So basically, a young person comes into the office and says, I've been put under threat. My organisation will contact murky people. They will say, yes, this is true. I can confirm that this threat is genuine. Tell him he better start packing his bags. And then we are able to issue a letter to the police. The police can send the young person to the Department of Social Services, who are able to release a payment of £200, I think it is, to get this person out of Northern Ireland, or out of the town, or out of the city. Sometimes you will get people who show up at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon and go, I'm under threat, and they're not. They just want the £200. But usually, quite a lot around Christmas. Usually, though, we've had, off the top of my head, I'd say we've had about 40 cases this year to date. So it's still very much a factor. As for mediations, I am not a mediator, but our office delivers mediation training 3 levels: introduction, intermediate and advanced mediation, and conflict resolution. Our mediation service is open to anybody in need of mediation. We have some funding which allows us to provide free mediation services to people who are really particularly in need at our discretion. We do family mediation and things like that, neighbourhood disputes, but our office has been, particularly my director, Michael Doherty, has been very involved in mediating parades disputes. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the parades in Northern Ireland, which take place every year, and Derry was actually one of the first cities in Northern Ireland which managed to solve its parades dispute, and they now pass off fairly peacefully every year, although with a huge amount of work which goes on behind the scenes. But that would be a major, that has in the past been a major part of our work, and we are now trying to maintain that situation.
Yes, Nigel, I have a question.
Yes.
Well, thank you for being here, first of all, but I wonder, you've gone through an awful lot of trauma in your life, for the last 20 years at least, it seems. What do you look forward to, say, in a peaceful, when peace comes? Do you have, a lot of things left over that you'd like to do without looking around and making sure that no one's going to, harm you? Do you have a vision of what you'd like to do if you could just go anywhere you want and no one would care about who you are or what you did?
That's a very interesting question. Actually, I do have a vision. I do have a vision. Peace. That's it. Simple. Have anything planned for life? Well, I do a lot of travelling anyway, so I still carry on doing what I'm doing. But when I'm out of Northern Ireland, I can actually relax. So I don't have to look who's following me, if anyone's following me, because I'll hire a car anyway. But it's only when I come back to Northern Ireland, everything kicks back in again. Can I relax? Can Anna relax in the work that she's doing? None of us can. While we have the serious threat, and it is a very serious threat. If anyone thinks different, they're completely deluding themselves. Not being arrogant or blasé in any way, I do have my ear to the ground. I do have influence working with the relevant paramilitary organisations, but one in particular, and as deputy leader of the Progressive Unionist Party, I have more contact with that particular loyalist group. So I'd be looking to implore upon that loyalist group to hold ceasefire. Don't break it. Don't react. But then there's other loyalist groupings who I have no control over because they speak for themselves. So it's like a catch-22, you know. But it's not going to deter me for what I'm trying to do. For what I'm trying to do, it's not about me. It's about the communities that I work with. And I use the word communities because we have two communities in Northern Ireland, Roman Catholic community and Protestant community. So I'm working for the two communities. I'm not working for myself. I'm not working for EPIC because the Prison to Peace project is cross-community, it's cross-border, and it's international.
Both of you have talked about how this kind of newer generation is creating potential for more problems. But I'm curious how you think this conflict has been transferred, I guess, between generations, how they frame it differently, and maybe how you work with them differently, this younger generation especially.
I think possibly in the last 10 years we didn't pay enough attention to the more emotional elements of our conflict, to how it affected people. We paid a lot of attention to taking away the physical paraphernalia of conflict and to sorting out day-to-day issues, bread and butter issues, so to speak, but we didn't pay a lot of attention to talking about how it had actually affected people. So maybe that's where the transference has happened. I suppose young people obviously still sense we have a conflict in Northern Ireland which still exists. It's just a non-violent conflict at the moment, or not as violent a conflict at the moment as it was in the past, but it is very much still there. Our communities are still segregated. That hurt is still there. That fear is still there. So that's where I think the transference maybe happened. In working with the younger generation, we try our best to address things as best we can. We have a segregated education system in Northern Ireland, which also makes things very difficult. We have socioeconomic elements which also which impact on us. In working with the older generation, the groups that Nigel works with, the groups that I work with, the people who are currently engaged in violence are not speaking to anyone. That's one of the biggest challenges we face in the next couple of years. They're not engaging, they're not speaking, and they're quite happy to not speak to anyone. I mean, their ultimate goal is to bring the army back onto the streets of Northern Ireland so they can say, look, your peace process hasn't worked. We're the true defenders. And people say things like, they'll never win, they don't have the support. They don't care. They see themselves as being part of a link which is going on 400 years and it'll carry on when they're gone, as long as they maintain that unbroken link. So that's some of the difficulties that we face.
No, go ahead. No, you've got it perfectly.
How has the downturn of the global economy affected the peace process and peace building?
Give us the money.
Something else, will it? This lady here.
Well, my question probably fixes into that question. I understood that one of the earlier complaints was jobs especially for the Catholic community, since they had the least amount of money. Is any of that improved? Or does no one have a job anymore?
No, things have actually improved dramatically through equality legislation. Basically what our problem is now, through recession, etc., we now have unemployment run at 12.3%. And that's for a community of 1.7.3 million people in Northern Ireland. When I look at doing a bit of research before I came out here, in Eugene there's a population of 150,000 and unemployment is running at 13%. So we have the same sort of similar related issues, but no, because of legislation that's been put in place regarding equality, it's not a case of the Protestant community having all the good jobs. I think it's all the way around.
Yeah, can I just add?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Recently a report was published which was commissioned by Don Purvis, the previous leader of the party Nigel is a member of. And 4 out of 10 young Protestants will continue to third level education. Basically, if you are a young Protestant, you have half as much a chance of going to university as a young Catholic. There has always been a strong push within the Catholic community to go to university, possibly as a reaction to the inequality that existed in our community, in our society, prior to all the equality legislation. And Protestants now, half as many Protestants go to university as Catholics. Traditional forms of employment for the Protestant community have dried up. That translates as they now have to compete. I mean, traditionally, Protestants would have gone out of school, they would have got jobs in the shipyards. That industry doesn't exist anymore. They would have got jobs in the civil service. That has become more competitive, obviously. They would have got jobs in the police service and the security forces, and again, they are now competing with Catholics for those jobs. So we're in real danger of creating a society that is just as unequal as it was 50 odd years ago if this isn't addressed in some way, shape or form.
Okay. You both talked a little bit about the school system and you talked about it being segregated. Also, you mentioned that, I guess in part of your organization, you couldn't reach people who were 16 in some cases. Maybe that was just your example. But in what ways do you interact, two-part question, in what ways do you interact with the different aspects of the education system? And also, spoke, I think Nigel, you spoke of gaps in the education people get in terms of their Irish history. I forget who said that. What do you think are some of the problems with the understanding of Irish history that you see anyway in terms of the school system? I know that's broad, but whatever you can do with that.
Okay. In Northern Ireland, we have what is known as Catholic maintained schools, where the Catholic Church has a large influence. They often own the grounds or the buildings and they contribute towards the education system. Then we have state schools, which are largely Protestant schools. They, in theory, are open to everybody, but their board of governors will have a Protestant ethos, and so they're considered Protestant schools. Then we have integrated schools. There's not that many of them, and certainly not at second level education. In between the Protestant schools and the Catholic schools, we have secondary school. Same. When you're 11 years old, you do an exam. At the age of 11, or you don't do an exam and your teacher decides for you. At the age of 11, you either go to a secondary school, which is aimed at vocational students, or you go to a grammar school, which is academic and aimed at university. So you better up your game when you're 11, because you're boxed in from there on in. So this happens in both Protestant schools and Catholic schools. So parents will often choose not to send their children to an integrated school because they have the opportunity to send them to a grammar school, providing a better education, better options for going to university. That's the socioeconomic issues that I'm talking about. Less well-off people will struggle to send their children to grammar school because there's a range of extra fees that they have to pay, uniforms, school trips and things like that. So we have a very, very segregated education system, and the church are not really keen to move that. Where else do they recruit from? University is now going to cost £9,000 a year, which probably means not going to provoke a lot of sympathy maybe from this particular audience, but for people who are used to free university since 1948, £9,000 a year is going to be quite a lot. So they are the challenges that we face in the education system. I work with all the secondary and grammar schools in Derry, in our city. You have to go to each individual school, beg to be let in. If you're lucky, you'll manage to make contact with a good citizenship teacher or whatever, and they'll allow you to come into the school. Teachers aren't trained to address the conflict, the past, any of those things. And if you're in a school where you're all Catholics, sure, we don't need to talk about it anyway, because there's no problems. We're all Catholics or Protestants, so.
And in answer to your second part regarding Irish history, You've got to go back. Well, I went back to the inception and the birth of a new state of Northern Ireland in 1922. For whatever reason, the school curriculum, obviously it come from mainland UK, it ensured I was taught my history pertaining to Henry and his 8 wives, the Iron Age, the Bronze Age and the Stone Age, but I was not taught Irish history. And the same equally applied to the Catholic schools. Therein lay part of the problem, because we did not know our history. If we had been educated where we understood our history, I don't believe we probably would have the problems that we have today. And it's interesting, when Parliament was up and running in Belfast, and the First Minister, Mr. Paisley, and when he retired, he was elevated to the House of Lords. And on his opening remarks, he advocated, listen to this, a united Ireland. Yes, he did, a united Ireland under the Commonwealth. And what he was actually doing, when you look at Irish history, he was quoting Sir Edward Carson in 1912. Carson was the founder, father of the Ulster Volunteer Force, and Carson advocated a united Ireland also under the Commonwealth. So if we could turn the clock back, and if people had to listen to Carson and listen to De Valera, etc., we probably would still be in the one island.
When people think of Northern Ireland, a lot of things mentioned is the murals, and they're both beautiful and historic, especially in Belfast and the walled city, but they also depict a lot of violence and anger. And I was just wondering what your guys' thoughts are, and what role do those murals play in moving towards peace?
It's a balancing act. What do you commemorate and what do you forget? How do you move forward and still not forget what people have suffered, and people have lost family members and they don't want to forget about that. People have lost family members who were completely innocent and were killed in an explosion or a stray bullet. They should be maybe commemorated more than people whose family members joined terrorist organisations and were killed in what they considered the line of duty. There are different movements towards re-imaging communities and creating shared spaces. That's the formal language of community relations speak. Most people want to keep the murals. Personally, I think they should go, but I am in a minority. I think it's hard to move on when you've got that in your face all the time, particularly when you live in that area and you're seeing this. I know that there's a small village on the north coast called Bushmills, which has quite a strong paramilitary links, and they have been very successful. They also make whiskey there. They have been very successful in removing a lot of their murals, and they have put up floral tributes instead and made things look different while still remembering because a lot of murals are dedicated to those who died and things like that. So that's been positive. I don't think the murals will stay in their current shape. The really violent murals, which depict guns and skeletons and things like that, they are slowly but surely being taken down and replaced with other images which are not as threatening. And I think eventually, do you not know? I think they will.
Just elaborating that, as part of re-imaging that I would be involved with, quite a lot of the murals that have been put up by the Ulster Volunteer Force have been removed and replaced with something more iconic. We have another paramilitary organisation from within the Protestant community, the Ulster Defence Association, and its military wing, the Ulster Freedom Fighters. And a particular statue that is disgusting, to say the least, it's a portrait of the Grim Reaper. And they've made it quite clear that mural is part of the history of Northern Ireland, and that mural will never be removed. You just cannot go into these areas and cover over and repaint with something else. You just don't do that, because these guys still rule and dominate the areas that people live in. So there's still a major element of fear, and it's going to take a heck of a long time, ladies and gentlemen, for the like of them murals to be removed, if they're ever be removed, because if conflict resumes again in Northern Ireland, make no mistake about it, you'll see more murals going up. You know, where people are trying to bring the peace walls down up in Londonderry. They're in the process now of putting a 150-metre fence up, you know, to further alienate and polarise the communities because of sectarian violence. So I'd be more concerned about that as I would be to a mural.
What are the prospects of a Truth and Reconciliation Commission along the lines of the South African model?
Absolutely zero.
Zero?
I cannot imagine that ever happening.
Why? Can you explain?
I think people are too, there's too much bitterness. I think people are too bitter. I think people are too entrenched still, and I don't see that happening.
Touch on the Bradley's report.
Yeah, the Eames-Bradley report, which was recently published, well, it was published about, what, 18 months ago now? It proposed giving each victim 12,000, thank you, Nigel, £12,000. They did a wide-ranging consultation on the past and how it should be dealt with. Two very respected members from each community, Bishop Eames and Dennis Bradley, undertook this consultation process and published this document. And one of the recommendations, now there were many recommendations made, but the one that everybody latched onto was £12,000. Everybody's adults in here. The graffiti that went up on the corner of my street was, stick your £12,000 up your hole, Britain. So that was how that was received.
So we have time for one more general question, and perhaps it would be one that would allow Anna and Nigel to highlight the success of their work. I don't know if you can do that, but if you can, please, one more.
And your work with young children, like when you're talking about 4-year-olds starting to have, formed opinions, how do you see, from your experience, the hope of things changing in people's minds? I mean, because you can change laws, but changing people's minds and their culture.
I have just finished a 2-year project, which was kindly funded by the European Union. It was a cross-border project because we live in a border area. We worked with over 200 children aged between 8 and 12. And these children live within a mile of each other but attend different schools and may never meet. So we tried to create networks, and we tried to create opportunities for them to meet. They worked together over the course of an entire academic year, so there was a luxury there in that we had time to establish relationships and build relationships. We designed exercises with them which looked at how significant colours are in our respective communities, how symbols are important in our communities, traditions, and we tried to create as many opportunities as possible for the children to explain to one another. Poppies are worn to remember those who have died or to commemorate those who have died in World War I and other conflicts. It is viewed as a Protestant symbol. So those school children were able to explain to their peers what this symbol means, and hopefully that should take a lot of the fear and lack of understanding out of these symbols and images, so that nobody needs to feel threatened by them. Because they live locally, it is hoped that they would continue. I know at least one of the two of the schools involved have decided to continue a collaboration, so their students will continue to meet each other. And obviously we try to educate them on history and on culture and identity. Talked a lot about the border and what the border means to us and the impact that the border has in our lives. And 95% of the children that I worked with did not understand that the border was a man-made thing. The border is there like the sea and the rivers, and that's just, of course it's there. So trying to explain that to them was, that's some of the things that we do. Are you hopeful? I live in eternal hope. No, I genuinely am hopeful. I mean, I couldn't get up and do this every day if I wasn't.
So Nigel and Anna arrived on Saturday. Clearly, some people in Northern Ireland know that they're away and others don't, but their cell phones have been full of text messages and calls from people back home to ask for their help. They were generous to take time away from their communities and give their time to our community. We will continue to do this type of programming at the university specific to Northern Ireland, but to other areas of the world as well, through Savage, through the Conflict Resolution Program, through the Carnegie affiliation. We very much appreciate your coming and sharing this with us, and we look forward to seeing you here again in the near future. Please express your thanks to Anna and Nigel.